Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we are reading again from Swiss Family Robinson, and we're starting with chapter 27, The Wild Ass, Difficulty in Breaking It, the Heath Fowl's Nest. We were scarcely up one morning and had just got to work in putting the last hand to our winding staircase when we heard at a distance two strange kinds of voices that resembled the howlings of wild beasts mixed with hissings and sounds of some creature at its last gasp. And I was not without uneasiness. Our dogs, too, pricked up their ears and seemed to whet their teeth for a sanguinary combat with a dangerous enemy. From their looks, we judged it prudent to put ourselves in a state of defense. We loaded our guns and pistols, placed them together within our castle in the tree, and prepared to repel vigorously any hostile attack from that quarter. The howlings having ceased an instant, I descended from our citadel well armed and put on our two faithful guardians their spiked collars and side guards. I assembled our cattle about the tree to have them in sight, and I then reascended to look around for the enemy's approach. At this instant the howlings were renewed and almost close to us. Fritz got as near the spot as he could, listened attentively, and with eager looks then threw down his gun and burst into a loud laughter, exclaiming, "Father, it is our ass! The deserter comes back to us, chanting the hymn of return. Listen! Do you not hear his melodious brayings and all the varieties of the gamut?" I listened, and a fresh roar, in sounds unquestionable, raised loud peals of laughter amongst us. Shortly after, we had the satisfaction of seeing among the trees our old friend Grizzle, moving towards us leisurely, and stopping now and then to browse. But to our great joy, he was accompanied by one of his own species of very superior beauty, and when it was near, I knew it to be a fine onagra, or wild ass, which I conceived a strong desire to possess, though at the same time aware of the extreme difficulty there would be in taming and rendering him subject to the use of man. Without delay, I descended the ladder with Fritz, desiring his brothers to keep still, and I consulted my privy councillor on the means of surprising and taking the stranger captive. I got ready, as soon as possible, a long cord with a running knot, one end of which I tied fast to the root of a tree. The noose was kept open with a little stick slightly fixed in the opening so as to fall of itself on the cord being thrown round the neck of the animal, whose efforts to escape would draw the knot closer. I also prepared a piece of bamboo about 2 feet long, which I split at the bottom and tied fast at top to serve as nippers. Fritz attentively examined my contrivance without seeing the use of it. Prompted by the impatience of youth, he took the ball sling and proposed aiming at the wild ass with it, which he said was the shortest way of proceeding. I declined adopting this Patagonian method, fearing the attempt might fail, and the beautiful creature avail itself of its natural velocity to evade us beyond recovery. I therefore told him my project of catching it in the noose, which I gave him to manage, as being nimbler and more expert than myself. The two asses drew nearer and nearer to us. Fritz, holding in his hand the open noose, moved softly on from behind the tree where we were concealed, and advanced as far as the length of the rope allowed him. The onagra started on perceiving a human figure. It sprang some paces backwards, then stopped as if to examine the unknown form, but as Fritz now remained quite still, the animal resumed its composure and continued to browse. Soon after, he approached the old ass, hoping that the confidence that would be shown by it would raise a similar feeling in the stranger. He held out a handful of oats mixed with salt. Our ass instantly ran up to take its favorite food and greedily devoured it. This was quickly perceived by the other. It drew near, raised its head, breathed strongly, and came up so close that Fritz, seizing the opportunity, succeeded in throwing the rope round its neck. But the motion and stroke so affrighted the beast that it instantly sprang off. It was soon checked by the cord, which in compressing the neck almost stopped its breath. It could go no farther, and after many exhausting efforts, it sank panting for breath upon the ground. I hastened to loosen the cord and prevent its being strangled. I then quickly threw our ass's halter over its head. I fixed the nose in my split cane, which I secured at the bottom with pack thread. Thus I succeeded in subduing the first alarm of this wild animal, as farriers shoe a horse for the first time. I wholly removed the noose that seemed to bring the creature into a dangerous situation. I fastened the halter with 2 long ropes to 2 roots near us on the right and left, and let the animal recover itself, noticing its actions, and devising the best way to tame it in the completest manner. In a few moments, the onagra got up again, struck furiously with its foot, and seemed resolved to free itself from all bonds, but the pain of its nose, which was grasped and violently squeezed in the bamboo, forced it to lie down again. Fritz and I now gently undid the cords and half led, half dragged it between 2 roots closely connected, to which we fastened it afresh, so as to give the least scope for motion, and thus render its escape impracticable, whilst it enabled us to approach securely and examine the valuable capture we had made. We also guarded against Master Grizzle playing truant again, and tied him fast with a new halter, confining its forelegs with the rope. I then fastened it and the wild ass side by side, and put before both plenty of good provender to solace their impatience of captivity. We had now the additional occupation of training the onagra for our service or our pleasure, as might turn out to be most practicable. My boys exulted in the idea of riding it, and we repeatedly congratulated each other on the good fortune which had thus resulted from the flight of our ass. During the training of the onagra, which we named Lightfoot, a triple brood of our hens had given us a crowd of little feathered beings. 40 of these at least were chirping and hopping about us, to the great satisfaction of my wife, whose zealous care of them sometimes made me smile. Some of these we kept near us, while others were sent in small colonies to feed and breed in the desert, where we could find them as they were wanted for our use. This increase of our poultry reminded us of an undertaking we had long thought of, and was not imprudence to be deferred any longer. This was the building between the roots of our great tree covered sheds for all our bipeds and quadrupeds. The rainy season, which is the winter of these countries, was drawing near, and to avoid losing most of our stock, it was requisite to shelter it. We began by forming a kind of roof above the arched roofs of our tree, and employed bamboo canes for the purpose. The longest and strongest supported the roofing in the place of columns. The smaller more closely united and composed the roof itself. I filled up the interstices with moss and clay, and I spread over the whole a thick coat of tar. By these means I formed a compact and solid covering capable of bearing pressure. I then made a railing round it, which gave the appearance of a balcony, under which, between the roots, were various stalls, sheltered from rain and sun, that could be easily shut and separated from each other by means of planks nailed upon the roots. Part of them were calculated to serve as a stable and yard, part as an eating house, a storeroom, etc., and as a hayloft to keep our hay and provisions dry in. This work was soon completed, but afterwards it was necessary to fill these places with stores of every kind for our supply throughout the wet season. In this task we engaged diligently, and went daily here and there with our cart to collect everything useful, and that might give us employment when the weather prevented our going far. One evening, on our return from digging up roots, as our cart loaded with bags drawn by the buffalo, ass, and cow was gently rolling along, seeing still a vacant place in the vehicle, I advised my wife to go home with the 2 youngest boys, whilst I went round by the wood of oaks with Ernest and Fritz to gather as many sweet acorns as we could find room for. Excuse me. We had still some empty sacks. Ernest was accompanied by his monkey, who seldom left him, and Fritz, horsemanlike, was on the onagra, which he had appropriated to himself, inasmuch as he had helped to take and tame it, and indeed because he knew how to manage it better than his brothers. Ernest was too lazy and preferred walking at ease with the monkey on his shoulder, and the more so because it spared him the trouble of gathering fruit. When we reached the oaks, Lightfoot was tied to a bush, and we set actively to work to gather the acorns that had dropped from the trees. While all were busily employed, the monkey quitted his master's shoulder and skipped unperceived into an adjoining bush. It had been there some time when we heard on that side loud cries of birds and flapping of wings, and this assured us a sharp conflict was going on betwixt Master Nips and the inhabitants of the bushes. I dispatched Ernest to reconnoiter. He went stoutly toward the place, and in an instant we heard him exclaim, "Come quickly, father! A fine heath fowl's nest full of eggs!" Fritz ran up directly, and in a few moments brought out alive the male and female heath fowl, both very beautiful. I was rejoiced at this discovery, and helped my son to prevent their escape by tying their wings and feet and hold them while he returned to the bush for the eggs. And now Ernest came forward, driving the monkey before him, and carrying his hat with the utmost care. He had stuck his girdle full of narrow, sharp-pointed leaves, in shape like a knife blade, which reminded me of the production named swordgrass. But I did not pay much attention, as I was too busily engaged in our egg hunt. On coming up to me, he uncovered his hat, and gave it me in a transport of joy, crying, "Here, father, are some heath fowl's eggs. I found them in a nest so well concealed under these long leaves that I should not have observed them had not the hen, in defending herself against the monkey, scattered them about. I am going to take them home. They will please my mother, and these leaves will amuse Francis, for they are like swords, and he will like them for a plaything." It was now time to think of moving homeward. My 2 sons filled the bags with acorns and put them on Lightfoot. Fritz mounted, Ernest carried the eggs, I took charge of the hen, and we proceeded to Falcon Stream, followed by our train wagon. When arrived, our first care was to examine the eggs. The female bird was too frightened and wild to sit upon them. Fortunately, we had a hen that was hatching. Her eggs were immediately removed, and the new ones put in their place. The female heath fowl was put into the parrot's cage and hung up in the room to accustom it to our society. In less than 3 days, all the chickens were hatched. They kept close to their foster mother and ate greedily a mixture of sweet acorns, bruised in milk, such as we gave our tame poultry. As they grew up, I plucked out the large feathers of their wings, lest they should naturally take flight, but they and their real parent gradually became so domesticated that they daily accompanied our feathered stock in search of food and regularly came back at night to the roost I had prepared for them and in which this little new colony of feathered beings seemed to delight. Chapter 28, Flax and the Rainy Season. Francis, for a short time, was highly amused with his sword leaves, and then, like all children who were soon tired of their toys, he grew weary of them and they were thrown aside. Fritz picked up some of them that were quite soft and withered. Holding up one which was pliable as a riband in his hand, "Francis," said he, "you can make whips of your sword grass, and they will be of use in driving your goats and sheep." It had been lately decided that it should be the business of Francis to lead these to pasture. Fritz accordingly sat down to help him to divide the leaves and afterwards plait them into whipcords. As they were working, I saw with pleasure the flexibility and strength of the bands. I examined them more closely and found they were composed of long fibers or filaments, and this discovery led me to surmise that this supposed swordgrass might be a very different thing and not improbably the flax plant of New Zealand. This was a valuable discovery in our situation. I knew how much my wife wished for the production, and that it was the article she felt the most the want of. I therefore hastened to communicate the intelligence to her, and she expressed the liveliest joy. "This," said she, "is the most useful thing you have found. Lose not a moment in searching for more of these leaves, and bring me the most you can of them. I will make you stockings, shirts, clothes, thread, ropes. In short, give me flax, looms, and frames, and I shall be at no loss in the employment of it." I could not help smiling at the scope she gave to her imagination on the bare mention of flax, though so much was to be done between the gathering the leaves and having the cloth she was already sewing in idea. Fritz whispered a word in Jack's ear. Both went to the stable, and without asking my leave, one mounted Lightfoot, the other the buffalo, and galloped off toward the woods so fast that I had no time to call them back. They were already out of sight. Their eagerness to oblige their mother in this instance pleaded their forgiveness, and I suffered them to go on without following them, proposing to proceed and bring them back if they did not soon return. In a quarter of an hour our deserters came back. Like true hussars, they had foraged the woods and heavily loaded their cattle with the precious plant, which they threw at their mother's feet with joyful shouts. It was next proposed that all should assist her in preparations for the work she was to engage in, and previously in steeping the flax. Next morning the ass was put to the small light car loaded with bundles of leaves. Francis and the monkey sat on them, and the remainder of the family gaily followed with shovels and pickaxes. We stopped at Flamingo Marsh, divided our large bundles into smaller, which we placed in the water, pressing them down with stones and leaving them in this state till it was time to remove and set them in the sun to dry, and thus render the stems soft and easy to peel. In a fortnight, we took the flax out of the water and spread it on the grass in the sun, where it dried so rapidly that we were able to load it on our cart the same evening and carry it to Falcon Stream, where it was put by till we had time to make the beetles, wheels, reels, carding combs, etc., required by our chief for the manufacture. It was thought best to reserve this task for the rainy season, and to employ the present time in collecting a competent stock of provisions for ourselves and for all the animals. Occasional slight showers, the harbingers of winter, had already come on. The temperature, which hitherto had been warm and serene, became gloomy and variable. The sky was often darkened with clouds. The stormy winds were heard and warned us to avail ourselves of the favorable moment to get all that might be wanted ready. Our first care was to dig up a full supply of yams and other roots for bread, with plenty of coconuts and some bags of sweet acorns. It occurred to us, while digging, that the ground being thus opened and manured with the leaves of plants, we might sow in it to advantage the remainder of our European corn. Notwithstanding all the delicacies this stranger land afforded us, the force of habit still caused us to long for the bread we had been fed with from childhood. We had not yet laid ourselves out for regular tillage, and I was inclined to attempt the construction of a plow of some sort as soon as we had a sufficient stock of corn for sowing. For this time, therefore, we committed it to the earth with little preparation. The season, however, was proper for sowing and planting, as the ensuing rain would moisten and swell the embryo grain, which otherwise would perish in an arid, burning soil. We accordingly expedited the planting of the various palm trees we had discovered in our excursions at Tent House, carefully selecting the smallest and the youngest. In the environs, we formed a large, handsome plantation of sugar canes, so as to have hereafter everything useful and agreeable around us, and thus be dispensed from the usual toil and loss of time in procuring them. Unfortunately, the weather changed sooner than we had expected, and then, with all our care, we could be prepared for. Before we had completed our winter establishment, the rain fell in such heavy torrents that I could not refrain from painful apprehension in surmising how we should resist such a body of water that seemed to change the whole face of the country into a lake. The first thing to be done was to remove our aerial abode and to fix our residence at the bottom of the tree, between the roots and under the tarred roof I had erected, for it was no longer possible to remain above on account of the furious winds that threatened to bear us away and deluge our beds with rain through the large opening in front, our only protection here being a piece of sailcloth which was soon dripping wet and rent to pieces. In this condition, we were forced to take down our hammocks, mattresses, and every article that could be injured by the rain, and most fortunate did we deem ourselves in having made the winding stairs which sheltered us during the operation of the removal. The stairs served afterwards for a kind of lumber room. We kept all in it we could dispense with, and most of our culinary vessels, which my wife fetched as she happened to want them. Our little sheds between the roots, constructed for the poultry and the cattle, could scarcely contain us all, and the first days we passed in this manner were painfully embarrassing, crowded all together, and hardly able to move in these almost dark recesses, which the fetid smell from the close adjoining animals rendered almost insupportable. In addition, we were half stifled with smoke whenever we kindled a fire, and drenched with rain when we opened the doors. For the first time since our disaster, we sighed for the comfortable houses of our dear country. But what was to be done? We were not there, and losing our courage and our temper would only increase the evil. I strove to raise the spirits of my companions and to obviate some of the inconveniences. We confined our livestock to a smaller number and gave them a freer current of air, dismissing from the stalls those animals that from their properties and being natives of the country would be at no loss in providing for themselves. That we might not lose them altogether, we tied bells round their necks. Fritz and I sought and drove them in every evening when they did not spontaneously return. As to the smoke, our only remedy was to open the door when we made a fire, and we did without fire as much as we could, living on milk and cheese, and never making one but to bake our cakes. We then used the occasion to boil a quantity of our favorite roots and salt meat, enough to last us a number of days. Our dry wood was also nearly expended, and we thanked heaven the weather was not very cold, for had this been the case, our other trials would have much increased. A more serious concern was our not having provided sufficient hay and leaves for our European cattle, which we kept housed to avoid losing them. The cow, the ass, the sheep, and the goats, the two last of which were increased in number, required a large quantity of provender, so that we were ere long forced to give them our tuberous roots and sweet acorns, which, by the by, they found very palatable, and we remarked that they imparted a delicate flavor to their milk. The cow, the goats, and even the sheep amply supplied us with that precious article. Milking, cleaning the animals, and preparing their food occupied us most of the morning, after which we were usually employed in making flour of the manioc root, with which we filled the large gourds previously placed in rows. The gloom of the atmosphere and our low windowless habitation sensibly abridged our daylight. Fortunately, we had laid in a huge store of candles and felt no want of that article. When darkness obliged us to light up, we got round the table, where a large taper fixed on a gourd gave us an excellent light, which enabled my wife to pursue her occupation with the needle, while I, on my part, was forming a journal, and recording what the reader has perused of the narrative of our shipwreck and residence in this island, assisted from time to time by my sons and their admirable mother, who did not cease to remind me of various incidents belonging to the story. To Ernest, who wrote a fine hand, was entrusted the care of writing off my pages in a clear, legible character. Fritz and Jack amused themselves by drawing from memory the plants and animals which had most struck their observation, while one and all contributed to teach little Frances to read and write. We concluded the day with a devotional reading in the Holy Bible, performed by each in turn, and we then retired to rest, happy in ourselves and in the innocent and peaceful course of our existence. It was unanimously resolved on, however, that we would not pass another rainy season exposed to the same evils. Even my gentle-tempered and most beloved consort was a little ruffled now and then with our inconvenient situation, and insisted more than any of us on the plan of building elsewhere a more spacious winter residence. She wished, however, to return to our castle in the tree every summer, and we all joined her in that desire. The choice of a fresh abode now engrossed our attention, and Fritz, in the midst of consultation, came forward triumphantly with the book he had found in the bottom of our clothes chest. "Here," said he, "is our best counselor and model, Robinson Crusoe. Since heaven has destined us to a similar fate, whom better can we consult? As far as I remember, he cut himself a habitation out of the solid rock. Let us see how he proceeded. We will do the same, and with greater ease, for he was alone. We are 6 in number, and 4 of us able to work." This idea of Fritz was hailed by all. We assembled and read the famous history with an ardent interest. It seemed, though so familiar, quite new to us. We entered earnestly into every detail, and derived considerable information from it, and never failed to feel lively gratitude toward God, who had rescued us all together, and not permitted one only of us to be cast, a solitary being, on the island. Francis expressed his wish to have a man Friday. Fritz thought it better to be without such a companion, and to have no savages to contend with. Jack was for the savages, warfare, and encounters. The final result of our deliberations was to go and survey the rocks round Tent House, and to examine whether any of them could be excavated for our purpose. Our last job for the winter, undertaken at my wife's solicitation, was a beetle for her flax and some carding combs. I filed large nails till they were even, round, and pointed. I fixed them at equal distances in a sheet of tin, and raised the side of it like a box. I then poured melted lead between the nails and the sides to give firmness to their points, which came out 4 inches. I nailed this tin on a board, and the machine was fit to work. My wife was impatient to use it, and the drying, peeling, and spinning her flax became from this time a source of inexhaustible delight. We'll stop there and start next time with Chapter 29. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.